Welcome to Windows on the World. Yes, another of our spontaneous broadcasts. Well, reasonably spontaneous anyway. Sorry about the fact it was slightly late, but these things often do appear at the last minute. And we've been doing a lot of talks recently. Hope you're keeping up with the shows, everybody. Got a great one tonight. Casey Wayland from North Idaho Exposed and peoplesrights.org. and Vicky Davis from the Technocratic Tyranny.com. And we're going to be talking about the marginalization of our rights. Yes, we still have some rights. So I'm going to be talking to Casey and Vicky, and I'm going to bring them straight in. So brilliant, very short intro there. Casey's on the road, and Vicky is somewhere that we don't know about.
Hidden deep underground.
Are you in one of them DUMBs, one of those deep underground bases?
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic, because I never actually knew where you were anyway, Vicky, because we've spoken mainly on the radio. I've had you on my show quite a few times, and you're a bit of an expert about the way systems work, because that was your background. So before we go any further, and I introduce Casey, who's on the run at this very moment. Just tell the listener who you are, because it's been a while since you've been on our show, and your website, the technocratictyranny.com, explains perfectly what is going on the sort of systems analysis end of the whole bigger picture.
Okay, well, what I did for a living was that I was a systems analyst programmer on mainframe computer systems. And so when I first started, detected that there was something really wrong going on in our world and that it was connected to systems, I started doing heads down research. And so I've documented everything that I've learned over the years, and it's been like putting together a 1,000,000-piece puzzle of what's going on. And you, to get the best explanation for it, I would suggest that you go to TED Talks and look for a guy named Parag Khanna. That's Parag space Khanna, and listen to his videos, because what he tells you is that globalization, they have a new organization for the world, and it doesn't involve country borders or state borders or any kind of geographically oriented borders. It's connectivity. The connections, horizontal connections all over the world, like what we're doing right now. You're in Bulgaria. Casey's in northern Idaho. I'm in southern Idaho. And that is the new organization of the world.
I think it's very interesting, Vicky, just to inform the viewer, because we've done quite a lot of these shows, and your background in the way systems operate was really helpful to me, because it basically validated the concept I had of how it all worked. In other words, what you've just said is exactly what I've been saying for the past few years. In other words, countries don't matter anymore. They're part of an operating system. And that operating system is a global system. So, in other words, the globalists don't have a particular country. It used to be that everything was kept in Switzerland and all the rest of it, but now it doesn't really matter. And countries are merely part of an operating system. So each country plays its particular part. And those countries are basically going in the same direction, but they have a slightly different implementation of the plan, which confuses most of the public. Would that be correct?
Yes, and people still think of themselves as citizens of a country.
Yes.
But in order to analyze the new global new world, think of yourself as mobile infrastructure.
Yes.
And the technocratic system that they are using to manage everything, which according to Parag Khanna is everything that moves in a line in terms of infrastructure, and that would be pipelines, roads, rail lines, fiber optic cable lines, the electric grid, all of that. That's the infrastructure that moves in lines. And you, as an individual, you're not a citizen anymore. You're not human. You are mobile infrastructure.
Yeah, a commodity basically, and basically it goes back to energy harvesting and the control of people as units of energy, and it all comes back to technocracy in a way, which came out of the 1930s. And your website is called the Technocratic Tyranny.com, and that is very apt to what things are. But the hardware of it is technocracy, but the software is communitarianism. And that's where Casey comes in, because that's where it comes into the actual rights of the person rather than this state technocracy. And when you start applying your inalienable rights, or in the case of the United States, the US Constitution, then you start seeing that there is no rule of law, which is where I'm going to bring Casey in now, because Casey's become a bit of an outlaw, even though he's never been arrested. So Casey, tell us a bit about, unmute your mic and tell us a bit about North Idaho Exposed and how this all happened for you to be on the FBI list.
Well, I was just tired of, things as they were, and kind of looking for that one person or something to get people to stand up. I don't know. So I just felt like God wanted me to essentially expose that law enforcement on a whole, they're not enforcing the rule of law. Essentially, they're enforcing the dictates from the administrative state. And it's been very interesting over the last couple of years to kind of highlight, showcase that, where the system is not, it's very easy almost now to use something maybe from the Idaho Constitution and just as one of our enumerated rights, are you going to actually uphold this or not? And we're finding out across the board that essentially, our rights are just being trampled on. So, it's been an interesting ride. But yeah, here we are now. We're in Idaho, and we're still under a state of emergency. After the governor passed the emergency orders in March of 2020 after COVID. So, like Vicky would say, we're under medical martial law right now, across the nation, across the world, right? So, and our legislature hasn't been able to meet and really get anything done because of the emergency order. The governor will not lift it. He exceeded the duration of time. I think it was like 90 days. Anyways, there was a point in time where he was supposed to remove that, and he didn't do it. And so it's basically seized up our legislature. So I talked yesterday with Representative Christine Zito, actually 2 days ago, out of Southern Idaho, and I asked her, "What do you think about the upcoming legislative session? Do you have any hope that anything's going to get done?" She just told me no. Basically, she has no hope. She's disgusted, I think. So that just gives you a little flavor.
No, it's really interesting, Casey, because I started talking to you about 18 months ago. I was on a Republic Broadcasting Network, and you sort of kind of got in touch, and we talked about quite a lot of things. And it's really interesting because the whole idea of what's happening, the whole concept of what's happening, happened in the UK as well. We saw this around 2010 and the introduction of Saul Alinsky rules, which you've been the victim of. And the main thing is knowing how this system works, and you've found out the hard way how it works, and actually going into courts and trying to enforce your inalienable rights, and that has caused some controversy. In other words, I know you look extremely white on this thing, but you've been labelled some kind of white extremist, haven't you? And kind of this is what I'm getting to. So it's absurd, right? And it's almost comedic, but in a way, it's not, because the opposition to tyranny is always framed in the same way within this system. In other words, you are a radical and you are out there to radicalize other people when you're standing up for your rights. Now, this is an extremely confusing situation, And obviously, it takes quite a lot of guts to stand up to that, because it's a psychological attack. And I've seen you standing up for your rights on many occasions. And I wish more people in the UK would do it the way that you're doing it over there. But you've been kind of victimized really for very little. And on my phone here, I've got a thing that the FBI have actually released. And I'll just go back and try and find it, because I'm having a bit of a problem here.
You don't need to show that quite yet, because we can kind of lead up to that, because it's
we can lead up to that.
It may be ipso facto it's from the FBI, but I would say it's more from local.
It's local. Yeah, it's local.
Yeah.
It's basically the communitarian thing. In other words, if you raise your head above the parapet, then you are deemed to be a threat, rather than engage with an argument or basically get back into your idea of what your rights are. They ignore that and say that they've been offended and you are in some way a national security risk, which is what Vicky would understand as being a biohealth security risk, which is the whole thing with what's going on with this new system. So in other words, it's a dictatorship which defines anything it doesn't like as, guess what? Hate.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And anybody who stands up for what would be a national position, or speaking as an American, or speaking from a position of patriotism, is outside their bounds of acceptable behavior, because under their system, everybody is mobile infrastructure. You are no longer a citizen. There's no citizenship. If you notice, our southern border is being invaded, and the rules that constrain us don't apply to them, in terms of COVID testing and, following the law and everything else. That doesn't apply to them, because this is the global world where there is no citizenship. They are diminishing the concept of citizenship and national borders.
Yes, but then you become a global citizen. So then you become part of the global citizenship, or the useful idiot brigade, which is basically like you become Lady Gaga or Madonna or whoever they want to promote. And then you do a big concert online, and that's the way the world's going to go, because there's going to be no more human interaction. The whole thing is very, very simplistic, actually. And there's nothing very clever about what's going on. Having studied this stuff, and I went into a very philosophical side of it last night on my show. But what they're actually doing is incredibly simple. But the run up to this, in my opinion, was much more interesting. Going back to the 1600s, and basically the introduction of Kabbalistic Freemasonry and all the rest of it. I find that much more interesting than this technocracy. The technocracy bit is a bit boring. And actually, I think that the whole idea of it is going to fail ultimately, because if there is any human spirit left, I know they're trying to remove it, especially with the injection schedule. But if there is any human spirit left, I think it will overcome this, because apart from anything else, it's just going to be too boring. What do you think?
Well, most people don't even look at the technocratic part of it and the systems that are controlling them. I heard someone talk about systems as being like fish in water. They don't see the water, because they're immersed in the water. Well, we are immersed in these systems. But I have been thinking about this, and a friend of mine mentioned the moral map. Have you ever heard of the moral map?
Yes, but I think you should explain it to the listener.
Okay, well, around the 1930s, this group, and I'm not sure who all were in the group, but they had a plan for what we would call global governance. They would call it global management. But this man, Lord Lothian, he gave a speech called Wings Over History. And I did a page on my website called World Reconstruction. And I documented their vision of the world, the map as they drew it, and the ideas as they drew them. That and one idea in particular was that nation states, like the United States, like the UK, they are really individual nation states are actually in anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And the globalists
Well, that
are,
is the definition of anarchy. Actually, small government is the definition of anarchy. Yeah.
is it? Okay. Well,
Mm.
and they document the idea was to bring all of these individual nation states under a regional governing system, under a global management system. And the moral map defined the way this would work. And the part that is worrisome is that they had a plan for foreign troops to be brought in to impose the tyranny on an anarchist nation state.
Yeah, but that's Vicky. That's also in the UN documents, like out a Safer Future 2007. I've been looking at this in probably different documents than you, and all the documents say the same thing. Basically, it's all been running up to this for a very long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I forget the name
Casey's
of the,
back. We can see him.
yeah, I forget the name of the British guy that was on War Room this morning, but he was talking about over in the UK, Pakistanis that are living in the UK terrorizing young women. And
Yeah, this is an old thing. It goes back. I think it's been used as a disruption and agitation principle, which the British are extremely good at, because, of course, they wanted to go out and conquer the world. First, they were nationalists, then they were internationalists, and now they're globalists. So the City of London basically doesn't really care about any of that. But I think that that's a very worthy point. Now, the crossover of different cultures, yes, is an interesting and direct point of response for the globalists, because what they're doing is they're highlighting a lot of this stuff. Now, yes, in the forced marriages and all the rest of it, and these so-called honor killings are something that is very abhorrent to people in the West, and it has been played up, in my view, as a divide and rule issue, because in actual fact, it's taken away a lot of the attention from what's really going on, which is the global coup. So
well,
yeah.
And the global coup, of course, is to destroy cohesive societies
Exactly.
within the nation state model.
Yeah.
And just about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago or so, we found out that NATO has established a base in Norfolk, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that we would have foreign military on our shores is a horrifying thought to me.
Yeah, but this is all Agenda 21 stuff. I mean, it was it's basically means that you give up sovereignty to the global governance system. And most people don't talk about global governance. They still think that there's a national issue going on here. And there isn't really, because what's just happened is, we've just said, it's a global coup. So we are under one system now, but it's unstructured and people can't see it. So when we see the same things invested in every country, in the respect that what's happening to Casey in North Idaho has happened to me in London, then it's a kind of global system. So I don't really see that. When we're now talking about these smaller divide and rule issues, I don't think they're important anymore, because the main thing is that we're talking about a governance structure that's already in.
Yes, well, and we can see it with these vaccine mandates. In all of the Western countries, they're following the same script of, the vaccine mandate, the masks, the lockdowns. And I heard it on a program recently that they will be opening up camps, and they don't call them re-education camps. They don't call them FEMA camps. They are COVID camps. But of course, we know they serve the same purpose, right? So
Yeah.
it's re-education.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think what's going on is even complicated. I, in fact, think it's childishly simple. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So people see it as a complicated thing, and you can go into the detail. I can go into detail from my end. But really, it's a system which has been imposed in every country called sustainable development. Sustainable development is population reduction and management of all resources and the theft of all resources by the World Bank. There's nothing more to it than that, I don't think.
Well, yeah, from our point of view, it is, but
I'm generalizing, obviously.
It's a complex thing, because when you're dealing with different societies, different cultures, different histories, and they are trying to erase all of that.
Of course.
And to have just one history, just one global culture and one global society. I think if people really understood this, they would be fighting a heck of a lot harder than they are.
Well, I think the main problem is that people don't understand the system that they're actually operating in. And what I got frustrated with is in the UK, that they keep going around in the same circle and not getting anywhere. In other words, I can put this information out, which has got all the documentation, a bit like you've been doing, because your background is in the systems of like computer management. Now, I understand exactly what you're talking about because it coincides with what I'm talking about. But the problem is that most people still think that they're living in this sort of let's call it the pre-COVID world, if you want, But the point is that everything changed in the UK and around the world, in Western countries, especially around 2010, because when Obama announced the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals and the communitarianism came in, people were completely unaware of it. But now, 10 years later, they've all been changed. So in other words, it's all about the greater good. And it's all about you being selfish if you're not part of a collective. Well, what happened to individual rights? Because individual rights are where the collective rights are formed. So in other words, you invent this imaginary word called community, which is actually globalism. Then you impose it as communities. It's quite simple, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's kind of it was kind of a sucker punch to everybody. Very much.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
And the leaders of our countries didn't really explain to us what was going on. As a matter of fact, they maintain a stance of invincible ignorance. See no evil, hear no evil. Everything's perfectly normal. Nothing to see here. While our society and our cultures are being destroyed.
Well, everything is about a decoy. In other words, the real issue is never addressed. And I've gone into this with public figures and members of parliament, or as lawmakers, as they're called internationally. Now, the thing is that those people are hypocrites, they are liars, and the public still think that in some way they are responsible. And the British government, let's say, they blame Boris Johnson for what's going on. It's got nothing to do with him whatsoever. In fact, he's probably the last bastion of the old school of the British Empire. And when they bring Keir Starmer in, they will have globalism. But then they go, oh, you're far right. The actual way that people are able or unable to frame the argument is the problem, because they don't understand how it's working. It's got nothing to do, as you said, with national government. The UK don't have a government. They have a governance system imposed from above, which is why on the 11th of March 2020, the Third World War was declared. And most people don't realize that we are now in the Third World War, the silent war, which is actually going to have more casualties than both world wars put together, because that's the whole plan. The whole plan is a 70% reduction of the world's population. And that's all that's going on. There's nothing else going on here.
Yeah. And so that's why so many people are getting into trouble, because they are responding in a way as if they were living in the nation state they grew up in.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That's what it is. And that's what the most fascinating and strange thing about it is, because I have lost so many contacts, not just because I've been traveling, but because those people who I used to know have no idea that what I was talking about 15 years ago has come to pass. I was talking about 25 years ago, actually. But a lot of the people in the UK will remember me talking about sustainable development and what it was really about as far ago as 2005. Now, I could see every little change that was coming, every little increment on the plan. And then it was announced broadly that 2020 was going to be the vision. That was going to be the big thing. It was in a lot of documents. So I wasn't quite sure how they were going to do it, and how they've done it is very audacious. There's no doubt about it. The audacity is all. But what I don't understand is that people still hang on to this thing, especially in the UK, that somehow Boris Johnson has got anything to do with what's going on. He's a hostage. He's got a gun to his head. And I don't think he really even wants to do it. But he's cowardly enough to go along with it. That's all there is to it. He doesn't want to be a casualty. He's into the old Bullingdon Club self-preservation bit, but he looks like a functioning alcoholic, and he's falling apart all the time. And if that isn't apparent to anybody who watches, then what is wrong with them? Because this is the same thing that's gone on and on and on again through history, but we are actually in a final phase of something, which means something much bigger than both world wars. What do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. And so what would be the manacles on him that would make him perform like a monkey for the globalists?
Well, that's easy for us to say, because when you are in a position like he is, then you are probably a hostage anyway.
Yes, yes, I think so.
That's a point. But also the thing is that he probably still has some of his psyche invested in this old world idea of empiricists, nationalism, and the fact that he was brought up to believe certain things. I don't think that most of the British aristocracy, I wouldn't really include him in the aristocracy, by the way, but what I'm saying is that this was very apparent when I used to meet people who were part of that old English aristocracy. I would bump into them now and again in Soho in London. You could meet a lot of these people. They'd often be in bars, and they actually had millions and millions of pounds, you know. And that was the thing I did like about the old aristocracy. They would mix with anybody, and they really didn't like the middle classes. The middle classes were trying to claw their way up the ladder, and they were never considered to be very sort of credible people to hang out with. So I always thought that was quite interesting. But what is the point here is that the British aristocracy don't realize that they lost everything hundreds of years ago, really. But with what's going on with this technocratic system, they are actually, a lot of them, going along with it, not knowing what's going on, which is very strange to me.
Well, I think that what the hold on them is, and the same is true in this country and in every other country, is third-party management of our infrastructure. Okay, now picture yourself as a leader of a country, and the threat holding over your head is that we'll just shut down your energy grid.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have chaos, and it will be going back to the jungle in terms of your society. Everybody will destroy themselves in the search for food, in the search for warmth. That is the key that is holding the leaders of this country, is the third-party management of their critical infrastructure.
Exactly. And that's why I understood exactly what you were talking about when we first started doing our podcasts ages ago, when we started doing those occasional interviews, because as I said at the beginning, that's exactly what it's control and management of all infrastructure that affects the livelihood of all people on the planet. That was the whole point of it. And people don't realize this is a centralized system which affects every country, and every country responds slightly differently, but not much. And I don't think there's a big deal about that. To me, that's kind of a given, and that's the way it is. But the misunderstanding of that is what's driving people around in circles, so they don't realize that this is nothing to do with a so-called pandemic. It's actually a global coup, and it keeps taking me around to the same thing. It's dead simple what's going on. The World Bank is grabbing all the assets in the world through NGOs, through all the partner corporations, which are the main big ones, and then they filter down into all the smaller ones. There's nothing really to it. It's actually, because I've been studying it so long, I just find it so remarkably simple that it's kind of, we'll never know the actual, the minutiae of the detail. But the main thing is that it's a simple system. It's basically the usurping of all assets on the planet. The Catholic Church did it with Unum Sanctum in 1302. Basically they said that there is no salvation outside the universal church. Well, the UN are saying there's no salvation outside sustainable development. It's the same thing. There's no difference to me.
That's interesting. Yeah. But most people are not looking for the use of critical infrastructure to be used as a weapon against their politicians. So, and I think the deal is that the politician can either go along with it and take bribe money, or they'll be taken out, one or the other. In disgraced, or something will happen. They will lose their position. So either go along and do what you're told, or it won't go well for you.
Well, it's the mafia thing, isn't it? Basically, it's a global mafia. So, I mean, I don't really want to sort of compare the mafia with the global system, because the mafia probably do have some kind of moral duties on each side, but this global system doesn't. So, basically, we're not talking about a family here. We're talking about a group which has been working on this for quite a long time. And it's not even that complicated. I mean, I go into all this stuff like the Rose Cross, and I was talking about Ellis Cohen's and all the esoteric side of where this came from. But at the end of the day, it's all about control and management of population and people. And people who actually put themselves into the position of saying, well, it's our duty to sort these lot out. There's nothing really to it. I mean, I've got bored with a lot of the detail now, because I put the detail out like you have, for so many years. Oh, Casey's back. The outlaw's back. Well, I don't know whether he's back, actually. He's whirring around and nothing's happening. But we should bring him in, really, because North Idaho Exposed have been doing some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, well, and Casey's story is a very important story, because it shows you the way that they are monitoring anybody they're monitoring everybody, but they monitor in particular anybody who objects to the changes that are being forced upon us in our society that are contrary to our law, history, and culture.
Yes.
And so, and it isn't just the local police that are keeping track of them. It's actually the FBI is monitoring people, and they will inform the local officials, which is what happened in Casey's case. He found that out when he did a FOIA request. And it showed the communications between their local county crime analyst at the regional intelligence group and the FBI.
It's global to local, isn't it? That's the whole point of Agenda 21. We're talking about a control and management system which goes from global to local. Now, that's a really interesting thing, because this happened to me years ago when I was taken on my local council, and this is about 10 years ago. And they were doing it then in the UK, but it wasn't actually linked up particularly to anti-terror stuff, which it is now, you see. So basically what they've done through the Human Covert Intelligence Bill, they've got going through now, and the COVID Act really defines anybody outside that as a threat to biohealth security. So it doesn't matter whether you are defined as an outsider or a threat to biohealth security. That's the worrying thing, because, of course, in the ex-Soviet Union, if you were deemed to be an intellectual challenge for the state, then you would be locked up in a mental hospital. Now, that's exactly what this is about. And it's very insidious. And I was talking about this a long time ago because I could see it coming. I talked about how children were being taught in school to stitch up their parents, and that was 10 years ago. I was talking about how this global surveillance system came into local councils, and that's why I had a lot of kind of interaction with the local council. And then now what we've got is everybody is deemed to be a threat to national security. And that's what this is really about. So in other words, if you stand up for your rights, you're a threat to national security because the hive mind has already been created, the communitarian system is in, and the whole point of the COVID-19 agenda is to get the people who don't take the medical treatment to be attacked by those that do. It's a very simple system. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And that's what it's about, isn't it, Vicky?
Yes, and that's exactly what George W. Bush said, right?
Yes.
You're either with us or with the terrorists.
Yeah, it's a way of defining the enemy as anybody who's outside the official narrative. It's very simple stuff. There's nothing complicated going on here.
Except to define who is us. Because the globalist objective is to eliminate the us that we understood in the world we grew up in.
Well, of course, because you're going to be then accused of hanging on to the past. You're out of touch with the new kind of system, and because you're old under the UN system, then you're going to die soon. And why are you being so selfish?
Yeah.
Right.
I should just run right down to the local hospital and get one of those hot shots to.
Yeah, just get one of those injections. They're really painless, and they play you some great videos as you're going under, and then your family can sort of identify you, and then you can be buried, and it's all over. It only takes a few hours, Vicky. Come on.
Right. And the hospital gets the reward of, a percentage of the money.
Yeah, but then you'll be COVID positive, you see. You'll be COVID positive. So it just helps the whole human race, because then you're helping the COVIDian action plan.
Right. Well, and the money that they would have paid me in Social Security that I would have just wasted living, and the money that they would have spent on my health care under Medicare, they don't have to spend that. So they give a percentage of that to the hospital. Exactly,
Vicky. Everybody
and that
wins.
Helps the community.
Well, that's it. But the funny thing is, I mean, it's all in these old movies anyway. I mean, if you watch any of these sci-fi movies like Logan's Run and all that, I mean, it was all about that. It's all about, well, basically your time's up, get off the planet. And that's what Agenda 21 really is. And the thing is that if you go to these yuppies who have bought into all this, who live in these smart gulags, who are surveilled 24 hours a day and want more surveillance, and are walking around with masks on all day and getting their kids vaccinated, they will actually take issue with all that and say, well, actually, there are too many people on the planet. Then if you go to them, well, why don't you set a good example and kill yourself? They'll go, what? That's really offensive. That's really offensive. And say, well, so you think that for some reason there's a population reduction plan going on and you're not involved in it. And that is the deception. They think it's not them.
Yeah. Well, young people think that they're going to live forever. They can't see.
Yes.
But when you're my age, you have vision in both directions.
I know. I was 35 once. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so according to the plan, I have a duty to die because I'm on that down slope, you know?
Yeah, but my point is this, Vicky, you see, that under whose authority are they saying that? So basically, there's this kind of consensus reality that's come out of this UN Global Action Plan that they can dictate what you have, where you live, how you live, and for how long. Well, to me, I thought we had God-given rights, you see, and that's what makes me a danger and far right and a victim of hope, not hate, because I don't like being told what to do by people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, see, there you go, thinking like a
Hmm.
human being. And, you know, under the new system, we don't have those. You are a mobile infrastructure. That's what you are, and these third parties manage infrastructure. And so we just all need to fall into line and do what they tell us to do, and don't ask questions. Just, you know, when they say hop, you just say how high.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, the main thing with this, from my point of view, is that I've been trying to sort of explain this system, which is really simple, for many, many years. And people seem to be immune from actually what we're talking about, which I find really weird now at this point, because it's blatantly obvious what the plan is. And maybe, and this is kind of a throwing this out there, that there's a much bigger thing behind this. Maybe the planet is being depopulated by something off planet, because I can't actually see what these people want to achieve. Because if they achieve a 70% population reduction, then what? What difference is it going to make to people who live in Switzerland?
They can have all the lobster and abalone they want to eat.
Well, they can already have that anyway. There's lobster farms everywhere. You know, what does that? It doesn't mean anything. But I think that this is an intergenerational plan, which I don't think has been properly thought out. Because what they've done through materialistic atheism, which they've thrust on the planet, which they think is the way forward, they've missed out the key component, which is why the hell are we here in the first place?
I would say that's probably true, and think that they formulated this plan. They probably
Someone's just
always,
said, "Hey, I live in Switzerland." Hey, we've got the Illuminati listening. No, I'm only joking, Simon. It was, you know, I mentioned that because that used to be the fashionable place for the globalists. Well, they can live anywhere they want now, can't they? It doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter.
No.
But yeah, and that's the point of the connectivity, global connectivity. And
Mark, are we talking about aliens? I'm an
well,
alien.
they might
I'm a
as well
legal
be.
alien.
They might as well be, because they've separated themselves from the rest of humanity. They are separate and apart from us. They are breakaway.
Well, I think what it is they have a different conceptual idea of management. And when I've looked at it, I can kind of understand why they've done it and where they're coming from. But what I don't really understand is what it's going to achieve in the long term, because the whole thing is about the idea that the world is going to become so overpopulated that all resources will be used up. Well, that's simply not true. So even at the present rates of population growth or, you know, decline, it's not true. So the whole thing's based on a false premise. So where do you stand then? In other words, it's not really about the ability for the earth to sustain the amount of people. Well, then what is it about? And that to me is the key point.
It's the will to power.
Well, yes, but that doesn't stand up as an argument, you see.
Well, I'm not sure, because I personally can't relate to an objective or a mission to control people or manage people. But there are people who that is their main goal in life, is to be in control, to be the ultimate leader. It's kind of like a game of King of the Hill,
Well, I think there's an idea that in a way, I can understand the struggles through religion and belief systems. But what I can't understand is now the very simplistic idea that they've used the environment to reduce the world's population on the back of a huge lie. And then what? It doesn't make sense. So that's why I think, well, in actual fact, are these people possessed by something off the planet? Maybe the planet's going to be terraformed for 1 million years and something else is going to happen, because I can't see the point of it now. It doesn't make any sense to me. So maybe these people who are imposing it are just useful tools of something else, because I can't see that they even have an argument anymore. Sorry to keep reiterating the point, but I think it's quite an important one,
Yeah, I think it is an important one. But the thing is that I don't think that they think on the same levels that we do. We think on levels of humanity.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think on their level. I'm trying to think of it on their level. Once you've achieved this, yeah, I think so, because we're talking about a system of management, right? So you think, okay, well, I can look dispassionately and see from their point of view. I believe that I can look at it from their point of view. Now, it's a very insular one, but it comes out of eugenics, comes out of all this stuff that they've been led to believe. Then, of course, they're victims of the system in a certain way as well, because they think the system served them. But who are they serving? That's my real question, because I can't see what the point of any of this is anymore. If they achieve 70% depopulation, which is the only way that renewables will ever work, then we become net zero. But what have they actually really achieved? Because populations are declining anyway. Is it that they can't wait for the populations to decline? There's loads of questions here, which I don't think even they can answer now, because I think they've set something going.
I think you're trying to put it into a philosophical, and
yes,
as if people need a reason to do things. The people that I was talking about, whose goal in life is the absolute pursuit of power, it would be kind of like a God thing, like restarting the world. They get to erase the world as it is and then reconstruct a new world with a much smaller population. And
yeah, that was the aim of the Rosicrucians. That's the whole point. I mean, I was talking about that last night. I mean, this is not a new thing. This has never been a new thing. But what I dispute about it is that because I can understand what they're trying to do, I could argue the point and sort of generate a discussion as to what is the point of this, because it's not ultimately going to benefit anyone or anything.
Well, and maybe the point is there is no point.
Yes. Yes. Well, people are putting things like good against evil, and I think it is in a way, because the evil is always about control. And we've done a show with Jerry over the last couple of days, Jerry Marzinski, about that. And I think that's the most important stuff we do in some ways, because that is where the real battle is. And yes, it is a battle of that, because what the whole gaslighting and the attacks and the way the propaganda works is exactly the way demonic entities work. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. So you can put it down to something as very simple as that. And I think that has in fact, a very good status as an argument, because when you actually look at these people and you think, okay, I don't really understand what they're trying to achieve anymore. This is really when you see the end game. So I think that, the battle of good and evil is is basically what it is about. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea that it was based on is a false premise in the first place. I think that's really the crux of the argument here, which I can never really get beyond that, because the whole idea that they're talking about mass depopulation, well, most countries are declining anyway.
Yeah, but probably not enough,
Yeah,
not
quick
enough
enough.
for
Yeah.
what they want, not fast enough. So, yeah, I think they're just, well, think of this. They've had this plan in the modern world since the 1930s. They probably always had it, but with the ability of science to give them the tools to do this kind of thing. But they've never really, I don't know if they've ever really looked back and done what you said, which is, why are we doing this and how is it working out? And, what is the world going to be a manageable place? But, maybe they don't do that because the idea is chaos. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it a lot. I mean, I studied the history of it, and I can kind of understand it in some respects, because I've spoken to a lot of people over the years, as well, as we all have, obviously, but I've tried to get to the sort of crux of it, and it came out of this eugenics idea. It definitely came out of that, and Britain had an awful lot to do with it, as we know. But it's a kind of system which exactly what they're going to benefit out of it. I think we're trying to get Casey back, but he seems whirring round here, and it would be great to get into what he's been doing locally, because we're kind of philosophizing a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe, give us some of your ideas on the stuff we've been talking about over the past couple of years, Vicky, because it's been a long time since we actually spoke, and you're very good on analyzing the sort of trends of this global governance system, because you were really a computer systems analyst. So just give us some of your ideas as to how this has been implemented, because some people aren't even aware of that,
Yeah. Well, it goes from the very simple idea that we talked about, which is control of the world using systems and connectivity, eliminating the borders. But it gets more complex in how it's implemented as you drill down. Okay, now they used the transportation system and population centers to design the connectivity of the global system, and that's how they eliminated the borders. But then when you start looking at the schools and your infrastructure systems, like your water lines and your gas lines and your electric grid, like in the United States, for example, they have connected up our electric grid with a third-party management managing the grid. So what they did, they separated the transmission lines from the utility companies, so that the utility companies no longer managed their part of the electric grid. Well, when you're thinking about that in terms of the security of the country, you would be saying, we've got to decouple this system right now, because having these third-party managers over the transmission grid is an incredible vulnerability. But they aren't doing that, see. So, and what I'm saying is just simple logic. You don't have to be a technical person on any level to think that. It'd be like you giving the key to your house to your next door neighbor.
Yeah, obviously.
So, but there are so many different systems, and it gets harder to analyze as you go down, where you're having to look at the detail of law and regulation and how things should work and so forth. But the technocratic system steps all the way down from global to absolutely local, to the smart meter on your house that's going to control the use of your appliances in your house. And they can do all of that because the computer systems are good at that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whereas they could never do that with people.
No, and I think that the whole sort of basis of it is pretty flawed anyway, because it all revolves around there being electricity for a start.
Well,
And
that's the threat on our that's what I believe is the threat on our political leaders. Our Congress seems to be virtually useless at this point.
well, it's been hijacked, hasn't it? I mean, I think most people with a functioning brain cell will realize that this zombie that's in the the presidency at the moment was actually not elected. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. And their intent with the election systems, with this whole COVID emergency, it included the ability for the governors to implement emergency provisions for the election system.
Yes.
So they were able to change the rules. Like in Idaho, for example, we did not have mail-in ballots, but under this emergency rule, they made, it was just wide open ended, just mail in a ballot. And so in order to implement permanent control under these systems, they need to be able to maintain the facade of an election. But of course, with computer elections systems, it will be a selection and a fraud.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite clearly it was a fraud. I mean, you didn't even have to really look into it that much to see that. And the whole idea of the global to local thing is that you can create fraud locally. So that's how they got in a lot of these people who were just parachuted into positions. So we've got them in the UK. We've got people I've identified, and I've also identified MP. I don't know what that is. That sounds a bit loud. But I've identified these people as being parachuted in since 2010. None of that is very far-fetched. I mean, it's just kind of the way it's gone. So I don't think that's even an issue. It's the point to me is that, well, why the hell haven't people realized that? Can't they see that this guy's just a puppet and an idiot? I mean, how obvious does it have to get? I think there's actually a big joke going on. How much are these idiots going to take?
Yeah. The media controls most of that. They are pretending that Joe Biden is not a joke.
How can you pretend that he's not a joke? You can pretend he's not a joke, but it's not really a joke, actually. I think it's kind of an insult,
Well, both. It's both. But that's what gaslighting is, right?
Yes. Yes, it's basically denying something. It's denying something to be true. So in other words, gaslighting, or the way demonic entities work is they'll attack you with a knife and cut you and say, why are you attacking me?
Yes, exactly. And that's how those human rights groups, like the one you were talking about, hate doesn't live here, or
hope not hate.
Hope
well, basically, hate. What they're really about is they're protecting the national interest in a way. So what they do is they give a gentle ribbing to people like me, because they say, well, if you listen to Mark Windows going on about the moon landings didn't happen, you may very well be radicalized into the extreme far right. But they never explain how that leap's going to happen, because obviously anyone who went to my website would think, well, that wouldn't happen. What's he talking about? Anyway, so he's against left and right. He's identifying where the actual problem is. So if you're not doing left or right, and you're actually identifying the issue, that's when they attack you. The other thing is, of course, if you have anyone on your show who is a threat to national security, i.e. a critic of Israel. Okay. So I had Gilad Atzmon on my show, and a lady called Alison Shablow, who was irritating Jewish people with songs she was writing, which I thought was a bit, it's like, it was kind of pointless. But the point is that what they then did was they did a video about me, which they couldn't put on YouTube because their YouTube videos always get slated. So they put it on Twitter, and I downloaded it, and it's like a comedy. And it's this bloke in like this communist type shirt. Obviously, it's all intelligence services stuff. And basically saying, well, you may think this bloke's all right, but, you could end up in a lot of trouble because of the way he thinks. And that's exactly what's happened to Casey, right? Which is why it's a shame that he's not on here. But he actually found out that he was, being profiled by the FBI, and it's the Coeur d'Alene Police Department Officer Awareness. Okay, I don't know if you can see that, but I'll try. That's it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So basically, he's never been arrested, right? He says no arrests. Yeah. And then you get the one that looks like him. He actually almost looks like he could be the bloke who's gone into a school shooting people, which never looks like Casey looks anyway, right? So it's like they get these pictures, and it's like he's hanging around outside with his phone, right? And then he's walking into a building. Well, why would you have to be aware of somebody doing that? It's just, the whole thing is, it would be comedic if it weren't so sinister, really,
Yeah, Casey is a mind criminal, and
he doesn't think the right things, you see. Yeah,
that's right. And so our justice system has been turned inside out, and everything became about prevention.
Yes,
prevention.
That's the whole point. Yeah, but that's global, Vicky. That the whole point is, it's the whole idea is that you prevent terrorism by intercepting it, which is why we have a thing called a prevent strategy in the UK, which was very unpopular with Muslims, because if people said things in school, like Muslim kids said things in school, they would then be monitored. And those people who are monitored eventually become, guess what? Assets of MI6 and MI5. So then the next thing is, when they go to Pakistan and when they go out of the country, they are approached by people from the intelligence services who start infiltrating them. And this is a well-known tactic. It happened in North London. The people who were accused of the 7/7 bombings in the UK were victims in a similar way. And that's the sinister thing. It basically means that they're fingering you for something they can stitch you up for in the future. And that is basically what this is about, which is very, very sinister indeed, because it means that once they have a profile on you, then that can just be expanded. But well, he was known to the intelligence community 10 years ago, and they didn't do anything. That's how it works.
Well, and think about the predicate for a prevention of crime system. It means you've got to be monitoring everybody all the time for stepping out, because otherwise you couldn't prevent crime. I mean, the normal paradigm is that somebody commits a crime and then you go investigate it, arrest them, whatever. But in a prevention system, everybody is a potential suspect.
Well, it's you have to prove that you're innocent, you see. That's the whole point of the communitarian system, in that if you are against the community, then there must be a reason why you're against the community. You must be some kind of radical, because you are against the community rights and the beliefs of the community and the responsibilities of yourself as a citizen of the community. And that's what's happened in the UK. And people don't even know that it's happened to them, because they will say, we've all got to do our bit. And why are you being so far right? Well, wait a minute. I'm talking about something that's political. It's not right or left. But then they have to frame it as far right, because that's what came out of the intelligence services. That's what came out of the global community, right? The global community is trying to get everything into this new communistic type system, which is communitarian. It means the public do it rather than the state. And it becomes a community decision. So our community deem you to be hostile to our values. Well, there is no community. That's the trick. The community is an imposed totalitarian concept from above, which they say has been gained by consensus, which it hasn't. And that's the trick. It's very, very simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is simple, but it's foreign. It's a foreign concept in our country.
Well, yes, of course, it's a foreign concept to anybody who's used to having any autonomy or individual rights. Mm-hmm. But collective rights are now what matters, because most people, you will find, will go along with the control narrative. I've lost 99% of my friends, or people, well, they weren't friends, they were just a load of hangers-on, basically. But that's the point, you see, that those people I will never talk to again. And there's no point me talking to them, because they would energy harvest me and question what I'm doing. And then they assume that I'm some kind of right-wing Tory when I've never done politics. It doesn't make any sense what these people talk about. It's completely post-truth. They have no argument for what they're saying. And if you contradict the UN global governance system, which they don't even know that they are imposing on you, then they say that's conspiracy theory. So it's quite clever. But the thing is that the people who believe it are absolutely bloody thick. That's the problem. And I think that's the joke that the globalists have. They think if they fall for this, they'll fall for bloody anything. And they have.
And I think that's pretty much true.
So I kind of, in a way, that's why I say I can kind of think like them, because I can see that this is almost like a test. If these people believe this, then from their point of view, they're too stupid to live. Well, think about it,
I would not argue the point.
You see, yeah, because it's kind of, and no one will address that issue. They'll go, oh, how can you say such a thing? Well, I'm trying to think like these people are thinking, because if you look at history and the groups of people who are doing this, they're clever, but in actual fact, they're not that clever. They're not really clever at all. They're just manipulative.
Yeah. Actually,
it's not much to it.
Stupid followers, actually.
Yeah, they're not philosophically enlightened in any way at all. There's no way that they're interesting, you see, because I found this a very good point, that I went to different countries and I was introduced to different people, and some of them would even be in some of these high up groups, like the Knights of Malta and stuff like that. You meet some of these people and think, well, he's quite interesting, but they don't really know that much. They're just cogs in a wheel, you see. Mm-hmm. So the whole point is that when you start talking about these concepts on a really high level, then there's not that many people who can understand it, but certain people can understand it. And I would rather talk to people who can understand it than idiots who can't, because we're at that point now. We've got not much time to lose really with this,
That's true. And I have said that we're like a hair's breadth away from losing our country.
Yeah.
Casey's
how's the fugitive?
Yeah. Taking a break. Sorry about that. We had no internet, so.
No, it's great. You're back again, because we've been kind of, holding the fort for you. So we're now going to. I think we should give Casey some airtime. And
yeah, can you give me just a second? I'm gonna go grab my headphones really quick.
Go and get your headphones then,
because it's hard for me to hear you. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Okay.
Please. 499.
Okay.
Where is he? In a bingo hall or something?
No, he was driving back up north. He was in Boise, and then he was driving back up north. And so he was kind of at the midpoint when the program was supposed to start. So he's been kind of winging it.
Yes. Yeah, someone's just put in about the Book of Revelation. I was talking about that last night, actually. And the analogies that I think that show last night I did was really interesting. Why should I say that? Well, actually, because it was interesting. It came up with a few good points. And the main thing is that I was talking about the concepts which we're talking about tonight, but I was talking about it in a kind of different way. And really, a lot of this to me is quite simple, but it was more of a philosophical show last night, and we got into some very interesting areas in that. So yeah, have a look at that, and yeah, just having a look at the comments while Casey's coming back from the bingo hall. Yeah. Justinian deception. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, good stuff. My wife has climate change. Oh, I hope she gets over it. Yeah, there's a lot of people who've got that. Black lesbian poet, you're either with us or against us. Thoughts? Well, I think that just explains itself, doesn't it? Is that George Soros there? I wonder if it's George Soros, because he sometimes pops in about this time of night. Yeah. Did you watch the Gnostic Takeover? No, I haven't actually, but I will have a look at it. Bingo. Oh, he's back. Casey.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Yeah. Well, fantastic. We've now got you on, and we're an hour and 10 into this broadcast. So I think myself and Vicky have been philosophizing.
What did I miss?
Interesting stuff, but probably nothing that you haven't heard before. So tell us a bit about North Idaho Exposed. I mean, I spoke to you about 18 months ago, didn't I? And you were just getting going, really, with the whole concept, I think. I mean, it was quite a new thing, from what I believe. And then we did a really interesting interview with yourself and Ammon Bundy. And, of course, ever since then, you've been extreme far right, and you're now a wanted person, even though you've never been arrested. So how does that happen? Let us know.
Sorry, you're breaking up there a little bit. Maybe my internet's not the best here. Can you understand me okay?
Yep.
You sound great.
Okay. Oh, did you guys talk about the fusion centers yet?
Not yet. No. We talked about how you have become kind of a non-criminal criminal to,
yes.
I don't want to say law enforcement, but some of the law enforcement up in northern Idaho, even though you really haven't done anything.
Yeah. I mean, basically, what you've done is you've rattled a few cages locally, and now they're kind of profiling you.
Did you talk about Rig 9, Vicky?
Not yet. No, we're waiting for you. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, good. That's what I was just at. Great. That's perfect. That's what I was going to talk about before I lost internet. So, yeah, I had been handing out constitutions that I received from the Idaho Secretary of State's office. I received 3 boxes of 40, so I got 120 full-size constitutions from the Secretary of State, and I would take those into the police stations and sheriff's offices and maybe some other places, and just as a kind of a litmus test to see how that would go over while filming it. And so they, through public records requests, I found out that they had something called Regional Intelligence Group 9. I did a keyword search for my name. And so the sheriff's department was supposed to redact the information. It's not really supposed to be for the public. It's internal. And I got 2 of those reports a little bit over a year's time of each other. And so these reports are disseminated throughout the region to all law enforcement agencies. So FBI, just think of one that it's disseminated to them if they're in the area. And then some other random things which Vicky highlights in her article, The Invisible Wall, which you can find on the technocratictyranny.com, and she goes in more details about all this. But so the report was me walking into the police station or sheriff's department with the constitutions and filming, and it says that I was just handing these out and I was filming, and I'm not wanted at this time. And that really shocked me. And then after that, you see that there's a bunch of people that are actually wanted for actual crimes. So, this was disseminated out of the Spokane Sheriff's Department. And then the Coeur d'Alene Police Department received this report also. So they created an in-house wanted poster. That's what you were trying to show at the start of the show. Yes. Mark, if you, I don't know if you can show it. But, okay.
Yeah.
So okay.
Again,
so that
it's kind of it's almost comedic in that it doesn't say anything. You've never been arrested and you've never done anything wrong, but you have to be aware of you see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. It was unreal when I found. I think that was supposed to be redacted too, but they didn't redact that one either. So we got some free information. So I have an email from the Spokane Sheriff's Department, the sheriff himself, Ozzy Knezovich, in an email, because I do a lot of public records requests, and talking about the Regional Intelligence Group 9, and he's asking through an email chain, how did he get this information? You know, because I was doing YouTube videos on it, of course. So that was some really good red meat to get. And then recently, it had been a while since. So the first one was originated in 2018. The second one, I think, was 2019. There could be other ones now, but I haven't received them. So it was really bothering me. There's more to this, and I didn't quite understand it. So I just started researching it a little bit this handful of months ago, and come to find out that it led me to the Washington State Fusion Center. So essentially, they have an email address where all their it's called Flow, where all the intake information goes to the Washington State Fusion Centers. And then I believe that the Regional Intelligence Group 9 works in tandem, of course, with the Fusion Center. And I actually had a dialogue with, again, the Sheriff Ozzy Knezovich at the Public Safety Building. I was filming a little bit of stock footage for an interview Vicki and I were doing together about this topic for the Invisible Wall story she wrote. And he was actually walking into the Public Safety Building, and I asked him, "Hey, Ozzy, can we do an interview about the Rig 9, Regional Intelligence Group 9? And he just basically told me that essentially, he said yes, but he never called me, of course. But he said that the Sheriff's Department is the front lines for the Fusion Center. And then also there's one fusion, for the people in the United States, there's one fusion center in each state. And it's basically run by the Idaho, well, not the Idaho, but whatever, state police. And it's really interesting.
Very much so. And this has been going on for a long time, actually, Casey. I mean, I found that Crime Stoppers in the UK were doing a similar thing. They were linked with a group called, I can't remember what they are a corporation which is into mapping, geographical computer mapping, and layers of computer mapping with 5G technology. Now, what they were actually saying was that they could instigate or isolate events that were going to happen or were thought were going to happen. So in other words, it's a way of creating terrorist events. Now that could tie in people who have been flagged up by the state. So then you become a patsy. Now, I saw this a long time ago, and it's not far-fetched at all because all the infrastructure's in. And I did this investigation into Crime Stoppers in the UK, and I got a load of people taken off there. But it's a very similar thing. But that Crime Stoppers is national, but it goes local. And I managed to break that up. But that's just kind of a public face of it.
Well, we have a Crime Stoppers here too.
Yes, I know. It was started in the 80s by Lord Ashcroft, and it came over to America, I think. Well, they were running it in parallel. And I had a big interaction with that because they were putting people on Crime Stoppers that shouldn't be there. I wrote to Lord Ashcroft, and he pulled everybody off because I said, this is prejudicing cases. You can't go saying people are on the run when they're not really on the run. Just because the police don't like you doesn't mean you're on the run, you know.
Right, and that's exactly what they did to Casey.
Exactly. That's why there's a very strong comparison. So I saw this happening in 2016, 2017 was when I got the Crime Stoppers thing taken down, but it was ignored by every newspaper in the UK because it's a matter of national security, you see. This is what the public don't understand, this issue of national security and biohealth security, which is through COVID, they've now brought in biohealth security. So they don't need this kind of terrorist thing anymore. The terrorist thing will drive the COVID narrative, and the COVID narrative will drive the terrorist narrative. But people don't see it like that. They don't see these are just drive belts of operation of a system, you know.
Well, didn't we find that Rig 9 was in the public health districts that are the same as the FEMA districts in Washington?
Yeah. Yep.
So
that's right.
Yeah. So there is this combination of emergency management and public health. And they are the ones that are part of this regional intelligence group that are monitoring people. Now, you notice that it was Casey was handing out U.S. constitutions, and that made him suspect.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, so that tells you it's under the globalist system right there. Because
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a direct threat to the communitarian system. So those people are going to be deemed to be far right. Now, what happens is that they deem people to be far right, anti-vaxxers, and there's 3 other terms that they use. Now, none of those terms have any relevance to the actual issues being presented. So that's why it's all post-truth. I said, in actual fact, that we're in a post-truth world now. So we've had the post-truth world. It's actually post-truth. So in other words, if you've stood next to somebody who the government don't like, then you are immediately extremely far right or something like that, you see. That's what it's about. It's just about demonizing the enemy. Now, that's exactly what demonic entities do. They accuse you of things that you haven't done, which is why I think that's a very important point at this particular moment in history, because all they're doing is they're doing what negative entities do to people. And that's, yeah, it's a very simple technique. There's nothing to it, but it seems to still work with the majority of the population, which to me is quite worrying, you know, because they don't get this simple level of propaganda, a lot of people.
We have to invert your thinking. Casey was handing out constitutions, so therefore, you know, Casey is a threat to the state, but whereas in the community, you know, among American citizens, Casey's a patriot, you know, so you have to, you know, flip the paradigm in order to understand how that happens.
Yeah. So it's all basically the opposite. So this is exactly what the whole demonic world is about. Basically, they accuse you of doing something you're not doing, and it's very simple. But the problem is in this system, then you have to prove endlessly that you haven't done anything wrong, and it's a bit like a legal term called a negative averment. It means there is no evidence you did not mean to do this. Well, that's really difficult to prove, you see. And I used to use the negative averment.
You can't prove a negative.
That's right. So I said, there is no evidence you did not mean to cause me harm, distress, and loss at this point, and blah, blah, blah. I used to use a bit more clever than that. I'm just making it simple. But if you put a few of those in a letter, they would go, oh, God, that's going to be difficult to rebut. And exactly that's all they've done, really. They've just made it impossible for you to defend yourself against these things that have got nothing to do with you. And that's why I find it quite comedic, but there's a very sinister side to it, because then what they can do is the intelligence community can set you up for something you just haven't done. And then, of course, you've got the whole country against you and you haven't done anything wrong. And that's been the way that patsies are always kind of used in history. So whenever anybody's demonized by the press, I always think, wow, they must have done something right. And I always look for the thing that they've done right, you see, rather than going, oh, they're a racist, or they're this, or they're that, or the other, because none of those terms actually mean anything anymore.
Yeah, and in Vicky's article, The Invisible Wall, she goes into more detail too about how some of these human rights institutes are creating their own articles, which is basically propagated to the intelligence agencies. Vicky, can you speak to that a little bit?
We have around our country, there's one group up in Montana. What are they called? The
Montana Human Rights Network.
Yeah, the Human Rights Network. Okay, now we in our country, we've always had constitutional rights, but our country has been invaded by this globalist structure, the tentacles of it, and they are trying to flip the paradigm to where we have human rights, not constitutional rights.
Well, human rights means that you have the same rights as an animal, basically.
Well, yeah, essentially, yes. They are moving towards that direction. And it is the dehumanizing people, because under the global system, there is no differentiation for nationality or anything to do with your national system.
Hmm.
So, but these groups get grants, and they go out and they look for people who are potential problems to the global order.
Yes, of course.
And they write these long reports, and they're all kind of networked together. There's one organization called Southern Poverty Law Center.
I know all about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, they have been doing this sort of thing for decades, but
they were kind of an offshoot of the Anti-Defamation League in a way. I mean, it's the same in the UK, because what you have is you have Hope Not Hate, which is a mixture of British intelligence and basically Israeli intelligence. That's really what they are. They don't have any other reason to be there. They are basically an intelligence asset which demonizes anybody that the state thinks is being a bit naughty. And they're kind of comedic, but they get all this money. The Siegfried Rousing Trust gives Hope Not Hate £600,000. Then you get all these other funding bodies that are giving the money. And basically, they're a bunch of neo-Marxist middle-class tossers who have never experienced tyranny and never ever will.
no,
However,
but they
all is
accuse
that,
everybody else of it.
yeah, but they're doing it on behalf of a third-party interest, which basically has a huge interest in running the British government.
Mm-hmm. That's same
Okay.
here. Same
Yep,
here. Okay,
that's
so
right.
so there you go. Proof positive. It's a global system. Global
Yeah.
global actors.
Yeah, and it's kind of low level in a way, because I don't think it's even really high up. This is the sort of community level that they do it at. And Hope Not Hate in the UK, I've done many shows on them, and they actually sent Antifa, who actually beat up an old age pensioner who was a peace activist. So where's the hate really coming from? And this is the point, you see, that it is like a Clockwork Orange gang. You know, they've all got big smiley faces while they're beating the crap out of you. And that's basically what they're about. These are like people who are the official useful idiots of the new system. And when you know the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, when you know their weaknesses, then you can actually go to war with them. But unless you know the weaknesses, you can't. You're in an unequal war situation, because you're going to be bamboozled by them, because you're thinking, this is like nothing that I've done. I don't understand it, which is gaslighting and demonic attack. So they use very simple kind of techniques, but once you understand those techniques and you understand the nature of the propaganda they're engaging in, then you're in mimetic war, which is what it is. So basically, they can't accuse me of pushing the boundaries anywhere, because I've had people on that they don't like. They say, well, you might get radicalized into the extreme far right if you listen to his nutty theories. And the funny thing is, it's like when people go to my website, there's nothing like that on there. It's like geopolitical analysis, and it's got nothing to do with countries anyway. So once you understand where they are, you can play them at their own game. And that is, to me, the joy of engaging in their stupid and utterly one-sided warfare. You know?
Yeah, totally. You cannot be defensive. You've got to, when they attack you, you got to go on the offensive.
No, I'm the victim. I'm always the victim. Why are you doing this to me? All I'm doing is trying to put out this information. You have to become the victim, because if they're playing the victim, then that's no good. You've got to be the victim. No, I've got honorary victim status in this argument. And then you have to prove your honorary victim status. And that's the mimetic war, you see. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not far right. You're extreme far left. You're gonna basically be destroying everybody's rights under this, that, and the other, or whatever. But you have to have a good argument, you know. And that's why Hope Not Hate can't really bring me down, because I've done nothing that they can point to which is offensive. All I've had on in my show is people they don't like. But surely that's their problem, right? So, you don't like that person I was talking to down the pub? Well, that's your problem, isn't it? You didn't have to be at the table. It's very simple, you know. I'm kind of trivializing it because it is quite serious, but, you know, it's good to have a sense of humor about it, because the one thing they can't do is humor, right, Casey? They can't do humor, can they?
No, can't have that. No,
there's no jokes going on, is there?
No, got to be PC. Vicky, did you guys talk about how the January 6th things we were looking at yesterday? Did you talk about that at all?
No, we didn't. We didn't talk about that.
It's kind of eerie. Vicky and I are going to be working on this a little bit together. I'll be probably making a video on it, but
yeah,
it looks like the people that watch your channel understand what the People's Rights Network is. Essentially, it's a communications tool for people to connect with their neighbor.
Let me just explain it, Casey, because it's a really good idea. What it is, it's like a network through basically the whole of America, where people have their own individual. It's almost like playing the globalists at their own game. So what they do is they do this global to local thing, and they have these apps in the area where you live, where you can all kind of get into some community. Well, it's kind of usurping that idea for a real community, not the imagined one. So in other words, it's where people can really get together to basically enforce their rights, which they are very, able to do, and they can do under the Constitution. So it's a kind of family orientated thing, and it's presented in the right way. But of course, because people who actually stand up for their rights in courts use it, it's extreme far right. But when you look at the website, it's just a picture of families and stuff like that, which is why you have to go down these routes to make it a proper organization, so that when these people trying to attack it, then they have nothing to stand on. So it's like if they look at the peoplesrights.org, it looks, seems like American people trying to stand up for their rights. There's no flag waving, there's no guns, there's no, you know what I mean? So basically you have to take on them what they're doing. And I think that's what People's Rights was originally about, wasn't it? It was about, standing up for your rights in a very peaceful way. But of course, it's never going to be defined as that by these people who are opposing it.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And it's a communications network. Yeah. So each state is broken up into areas, and each area consists of a certain number of counties, depending on how many people have signed up. So you can also, if you're in the U.S., you can, or Canada. We're in Canada too, and we need people to start signing up in Canada. We actually need area assistance. So each, like I said, the state is broken up in different areas, and then that way, if there's an issue in a specific county, they contact the area assistant, and the area assistant will either send out a text message or an email to get the people in that area to show up at a specific place in case of government tyranny. It's been extremely effective. So now we're in Canada. We have over 200. So in total, we have over 64,000 members nationally signed up. And then in Canada, we only have, it's not very many right now. It's a couple hundred. In Ontario, I think it was Ontario's our largest number that we have there. But we need people to start stepping into the area assistant role, so that if there's an issue in a specific area of Canada, we could start getting your neighbors to show up to help protect your rights. It's really just that simple.
Yes. Yeah, that was it originally started, wasn't it? Well, we did that interview about 18 months ago, and it was basically, if there was something going on locally, then people show up. Now, that is in direct opposition to communitarianism, because it means that there's no consensus then, and people may be exposing what's really going on, and that cannot be allowed to happen, which is why you've come up against, opposition, isn't it?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're right, and that's a good point. It demonstrates there is no consensus.
Exactly. Exactly. It takes that away. But I think that this is where the warfare situation comes in, the psychological warfare side of it. I remember particularly when there was that person in your local council who deemed to be extremely offended and upset because a few people had turned up outside her house. This is where you have to be really careful, I think, because this is where you can get kind of loads of bad publicity and play into their hands. And it's a very fine line, isn't it, Casey?
Yeah, it's a tightrope, and David and I just saw the other person. There was 3 people outside this county commissioner's home in Ada County, and I just saw a couple of them yesterday, and they're still waiting for the outcome of their trial, essentially. So, but they were just protesting outside this Ada County commissioner's house. David was banging on a 5-gallon drum. and that Susan was like just kind of raising her voice a little bit, I think, and they were just protesting, and they chalked on the sidewalk, and then, they charged the police went back and charged them with just some erroneous things. And since then, the Idaho legislature has been trying to create anti-picketing laws where you're not allowed to go into certain residence areas to protest local officials. And just really interesting. So essentially what's going on though right now is with this January 6th narrative, over the last, I'd say maybe 2 years, they've been trying to lay the groundwork to basically go after people's rights. They last November of 2020, November 2020, or maybe it was October, they purged, Facebook purged people's rights from that platform. My account was taken down, many other people's were, and you cannot post anything from people's rights on Facebook. We also do have a newsroom that's broken up into state specific, so you can find out information about what's happening in your general location if you're in the U.S. and Canada. So check that out. But they're basically trying to lay the groundwork now that people's rights is a radical group, and they're starting to marry it into the January 6th narrative and the Washington D.C. January 6th narrative. And so there was an article recently published by ABC News. You can actually go find it. I don't have it in front of me, the title, but you can probably just do a quick search. It came out on January 5th, and it goes into detail. It's starting to marry together the Bundy saga, people's rights, the January 6th narrative. And so Vicki and I are going to be trying to do an expose on this because there's more to this, but it does involve human rights institutes again. So very interesting, and the SPLC, of course, to some degree. So we'll be trying to expose this relatively soon, but it's very eerie to see this happening. And Vicki, you want to go a little bit deeper there?
Yeah. Well, every time they do this, it builds the portfolio that Casey and I have been keeping, and mostly Casey, but it becomes more obvious and more clear what's going on. And so a few things have happened in the past few days that have triggered the idea to do a video, and for Casey to go back through and dig out everything that has gone before, so that we can build a complete story, showing who these people are and how they operate.
An expose.
Yes.
An expose. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, I've done much on the same sort of lines with Hope Not Hate in the UK, because basically you're defining them for what they are, because what they are is an intolerant hate group, and that's exactly the way I think that Vicki framed it in the article. So basically, you have to point out their intolerance, and I've just banned somebody called Black Lesbian Poet because they've actually insulted the trans community. No, just we get some people on here, and it starts getting distracting after a while, So I think this is the thing: is a mimetic war, you see, because I'm much more offended than they are. So I'm the victim. I'm the victim,
Yeah.
I've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and I've been offended and upset by these people. But the point is that with the sort of Hope Not Hate thing, which is kind of aligned with a thing called Community Security Trust, which is basically a private security company that supplies security guards for Jewish schools. How does that work? How do they become a political lobbying party? I don't know, or a political lobbying asset. And they put together this thing with Hope Not Hate about a group of elderly academics in London. And this is what makes a mockery out of the whole terror narrative. Because if a load of elderly academics who question certain historical narratives are the only thing the intelligence services in the UK have got to kind of worry about, well, it shows you that there is no terror. And that is the important thing. So if they're delineating you, Casey, as some kind of threat, then it means there's no terrorists. So who's creating the terror? And that's the next question. And that's the most important question, because terror can be done by the state against the people or by the people against the state. Now, who's actually controlling the whole thing? Well, mostly terror is controlled by the state. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. No terrorist attacks are allowed to happen unless they are sanctioned by the state, because there is no terrorism. So that's the important thing. And okay, so who are the assets then? Well, the assets are people who get compromised by the intelligence services. The assets in the UK would be originally from the Muslim community, people who had actually been marginalized. They find people who have a mental deficiency by going into mosques, and then they radicalize those people into their own religion, and they tell them things, and then they give them some drugs or whatever, and then they do something. And then the next thing is there's a terror attack. Well, isn't all this a bit boring now? Hasn't it been going on too long? And the whole thing is, we've now got today a 15-year-old boy has just been arrested by the police but released on bail in the UK for being extreme far right. Now, we don't know what he's done. A 15-year-old schoolboy is now a far right terrorist. And if this is all they've got, then their narrative is pants, right? It's pants. So in other words, there is no threat. There is a contrivance of anybody outside the system to be deemed as a terror threat. Well, how original. Well, call me a biohealth hazard because I've not been injected. It's the same thing. It's boring, actually. What do you think, Casey?
Yeah,
it's okay
it
for me
is
to
getting
say,
old.
You're the guy who's on the run, tell me.
Yeah, I got to get running here really soon too. So
yeah, you've got to get out of there.
no, I do. I really do.
Actually, we got some money coming in. You can pick it up, an easy pay on the way, but you got to get out of there, man.
I have to do my Alex Jones voice. It amuses me, but nobody else.
That's funny.
Well, it is. Really,
yeah, it's
the
it's
not funny, is it?
Yeah, the propaganda and everything is getting old. I think
yeah,
a lot
it's boring.
People are starting to see through the narrative. Yeah, it really is. So, yeah, but I really do have to get going. So.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Really appreciate it, Casey. I know
Yeah,
you're on the
I gotta
run,
get.
Yeah, thanks. We're gonna send you some money through, and hopefully you'll get a Mexico. Okay.
Oh.
I don't know. I don't know why I'm finding it funny, and nobody else is finding it funny. But I have to have some fun on it.
Yeah. Hey, make it happen. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting time right now. So yeah. I definitely encourage people to check out People's Rights, because we are the antithesis to the cultural Marxist revolution, because we're pro-family and pro-rights, and it's just a great thing. You get to meet some people that I met a lot of people, and they basically become family. So it's been great, and finding people that understand what you're going through is good. So definitely check out peoplesrights.org, and I've got some things coming up here. I'm going to be releasing some videos. Basically, the Idaho Constitution Party is being revived, so we may have a new platform coming soon, or a new, really revived platform, I should say. And we just did a photo shoot yesterday, and it should be pretty interesting. So really looking forward to seeing how that's received, and it should be pretty interesting. So you can just keep an eye on my channel, North Idaho Exposed, on all the video platforms, and we'll keep. I'm going to keep working with Vicky, and we'll have some sort of expose on this January 6th narrative and people's rights and that sort of thing coming up soon. So just stay tuned. And I do have to go though, so I apologize for the issues today, Mark.
No, it's great. I mean, it's made it a bit more exciting in a way, like you're really on the run or something, because it's
you want to make it a regular thing?
Yeah, that's right. You should be on the run somewhere. We could get a narrative going. It has to be a bit exciting these days, doesn't it? Because everyone's staying in, aren't they?
All right. Well, you're breaking up. I'm gonna jump off here, but nice seeing you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Casey. Cheers.
Talk to you later, Casey.
Yeah, that was Casey Whalen, North Idaho Exposed and peoplesrights.org. And I first talked to Casey about, nearly 2 years ago now, pre-COVID. And yes, there's only one way that the state sees real community engagement, and that is the enemy. And I had Ammon Bundy on as well, the Bundy Ranch was a very big thing in 2014, and it was defended against these federal land grabs, Agenda 21. And the thing is, these people who are deemed to be kind of outside the system or naughty are usually very reasonable when you get to talk to them. Isn't that strange? And isn't it strange how extreme the other side are, Vicky?
Oh, it is. And, you know, the other side is so extreme that had I not experienced the whole, well, not the whole thing. I mean, I was watching Bundy Ranch as it was going on, but it was from my computer. But from that point forward, everything that's happened, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, if I hadn't experienced it, I would never have believed it.
No.
It's like a different world. It might as well be that I entered the Twilight Zone, because it is an inverted world. A patriot is a domestic terrorist to the state, and these people who are Marxist communists, they're working with the state, and it's bizarro world.
Well, I think it's very polarized, certainly. I mean, the idea is that everything gets absorbed into the new system. And if it's not absorbed, then it's an enemy and it's outside. It's quite a simple thing. I don't think it's complicated. And also, you could say it's Marxist or neo-Marxist, but communitarianism is what describes it. Basically, you delineate what the community is and what is accepted by the community, and then you demonize everything outside it. There's nothing to that. It's really simple.
You know what? I never accepted the idea of communitarianism until I looked at the public health crisis standards of care, you know, for this COVID thing. And in those crisis standards of care, it says right in there that they are focused on the needs of the community. So if you're...
Yeah, but it says that in all documents, Vicky. Every public document says that now.
Oh, well, maybe I've missed it, but it was
Must have
just
done.
right there.
Because everything is about that, from
big and
global to
bold.
local. Yeah.
That the needs of the community were the first and foremost.
It's been going on since 2010 in the UK.
Yeah,
And
so
it
if you're
came
a
with
sick
Obama.
patient, if you're a patient and you're sick, and you know, they don't have to let you in the hospital anymore, which is contrary to every principle of a Christian country that I can think of.
Well, that went out the window a long time ago. I mean, the whole point is that the Universal Church gave up on that ages ago, and the Universal Church is basically incorporating all Christianity, which is what a lot of people don't realize. So it doesn't matter whether you're a member of the Roman Catholic Church or you deem yourself to be a Methodist or a Protestant or anything else. It all comes under the Universal Church. And those people now have been trained. They've been trained for a long time. So what they're doing is basically gatekeeping for the new system. And they've all agreed that the new system is what it's going to be. And you go into Rose Cross Freemasonry and all the rest of it. I've covered it in so many different angles, but it's all the same thing. They've decided that this is the best way forward. Well, that's their decision, but it may not be actually the reality of what is the best way forward. And you never get to argue that point because these people have been taken in by it. I mean, I called out my local MP where I used to live in North London, who I had many kind of interactions with, because she's a complete communitarian. She does everything to virtue signal and nothing for people or anything which has any relevance to what's going on. So everything's a side issue. And I said, well, this is the problem, you see. The real issue is never addressed. The real issue is always ignored. So in other words, identity politics is the distraction. So in other words, okay, so we've got all this kind of confusion through identity politics and meaningless nonsense, which is a side issue, but the real issues are, of course, never addressed. And that's why you can have a global pandemic when there isn't one. What do you mean there isn't one? Well, there isn't one. So the point is that everyone's distracted by the side issue.
Right, the
And it's the same
arguing,
then.
is there or isn't there?
Well, there isn't.
Meanwhile, they're imposing tyranny on us.
Yeah, but that's just a cover story. So there's the real and the stated goals. So the cover story is there to appease the masses, but what's behind it is much more interesting. Why they're doing it? Okay, well, once you start looking at that, it starts to make sense. But until people are able to do that, then it won't make sense. They're still virtue signaling, thinking there's too many people in the world, but they're not going to be part of the depopulation plan. Well, how stupid is that? Doesn't make any sense, does it?
No,
So,
not at
in
all.
other words, in the UK, we've got the Guardian and the Independent, which are basically tools of the arms of intelligence. And every story in there is to promote this new system. And everything in there, which is a kind of opinion piece, is all about identity or climate change or COVID or, what drivers are there of global governance? Well, this COVID and this climate change and this terror, there aren't any more. So basically, you've got COVID, climate change, and terror. They're what drive this new system. They're the cover stories for what's coming underneath it. And once you read the documents, it's all obvious. So that's the point I'm at with it, really. And I now want a face-to-face debate with the globalists to see what they've got to say about it, because I'm bored now. I know it's black humor in a way, but it's, I mean,
good luck finding them.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Where do they live, these
behind
internationalists?
walls. They're safe and comfy, and
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting anyway tonight, Vicky. I mean, I've been doing quite a lot of interviews recently, and we're getting listeners onto the show as well, which is good, because getting different points of view from different parts of the world. And I never want this to be boring. I mean, sometimes I do get a bit bored with it, and I want to keep branching out into different areas, which is why I love doing the Sunday shows. And I always come up with different angles on that. And I think the philosophical angles and the real kind of the struggles that people should be facing, which aren't being addressed, are the most important. Because that's what makes these times interesting, I think.
Yeah. Well, I really feel like we're making progress, with people understanding what's going on. I mean, for so long, it was kind of hidden. Everything was out there. You could find everything and put it together. But because the world was seemingly normal on the surface, the vast majority of people were just going along with their lives.
The vast majority always have, and that's the anomaly within this present version of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is quite interesting. They are incredibly gullible and incredibly trusting in authority. Generally, there is a general thing about that, but also very compliant, which is quite odd, really. And of course, the compliance has all been part of this dumbing down over the past 50 years. That's been part of the education system, and that's what divide and rule politics is about. That's what identity politics is about, so that nobody can be offended. So therefore, you have a society where no one can say anything, which is the newspeak world of 1984. Well, that's okay, but ultimately, is that really going to work? It's not going to work unless you've got a massively reduced population, or they're under even more chemical lobotomy than they are now.
I think it's breaking down. I think the invisible wall, which I used it in a different context, but the invisible wall between the globalists and the agenda and the way the systems are working, and the average person out there just trying to get along and live their life, I think that is breaking down. So I have some hope, for the future. This is going to be a really interesting year next year.
Oh, fascinating. Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So.
Yeah, great comments, everybody. And thanks for all the input, Vicky and Casey.
Been my pleasure.
No, thanks a lot. I think I've been confronting this stuff so much lately that you almost run out of things to say, but only almost. There's always lots to say. I mean, I think that the thing is that because we've been confronting this argument for a long time, it's kind of difficult, really, to get all the information in that you need to get in, which is what I've been putting out in my shows for years. And I'm now interested in what people around the world have got to say. We do this thing called Constructive Conversations, which is basically what this is tonight. And I think that people get quite a lot out of it because there's not actually that much of it out there. There is a kind of controlled narratives within the so-called alternative media as well, which we've kind of been talking about. So there's certain things, and the main things actually always get left out, in my opinion. You know, that's my opinion, that the main issues often just get left out, really. They're not properly addressed. They're kind of addressed from the wrong angle. You know,
intentionally so, I think.
Yeah, and this thing about, you know, it's framed as though it's a Republican Democrat thing, it's a right and left thing. Well, in a way, I think America's even more polarized. So I think it's kind of a fair argument there, because it's kind of obvious that the extreme far left are the Democrats, right? And then everything outside that has to be deemed far right, which of course doesn't make any sense. But in the UK and other countries, it's a bit more complicated, but you still got the same thing. It's like this promotion of this fake left that doesn't exist.
I think, we have a uniparty in Washington, D.C. is a uniparty. And so the only left-right is out here in the country, and that they're trying to destroy. And so I just, the party politics, I'm not even really watching it anymore, because it's basically all a fraud. That we have one political party, and they're both working, they're working on the same agenda. So
of course it's you know, it's two heads of the same thing, you know, two wings of the same bird ultimately. But it's the way it's framed to me that's quite important. You know, it's the way it's framed. It was almost like the Trump thing. You know, it's in the UK, it's like, I bet you voted Trump or support Trump. And it's like, what's that got to do with what I've just said, you know? But that, I think the main issue here is that it's what people believe that Trump stood for. I don't think it was about him. It's what they believe he stood for. Yeah. And that's never that's never taken up, you see. So that it's kind of well, what did he stand for? Well, ostensibly, it was about, you know, the reduction of legislation which affected small businesses and stopped people doing what they could do to earn a living. There was all these things that were never even talked about.
Right. So it was eliminate NAFTA, and then he signed the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement. Yeah. So that's what Trump stood for.
Yes. Yeah, the North America Free Trade Agreement and TTIP and all that, it all got conveniently forgotten, didn't it, in the past couple of years, because that was a big deal before that. So I think the main point is the main point is that the main point is never addressed. It's always the side issue.
That's true. That's right.
So if people understand that is all they've got to understand, that the main issue is never isolated. And my MP could not come back with that. I said, look, it's not about you taking your baby into the House of Commons and virtue signaling about your rights, when in actual fact you can afford a childminder more than anyone else on the bloody planet, because you're on 120,000 a year plus. So if you want to come down to the House of Commons, then I'm sure you can find someone to look after the baby for a few hours. So you took the baby down there to basically get attention for yourself and virtue signal on behalf of people who you don't even represent, because you don't have to live like they do. That's the issue, isn't it? And you couldn't say anything after that. So look, the main issue is that the main issue is never actually addressed. Everything's a side issue. And that's the whole deception of what this is about, because the globalists have a real and ostensible reason. So they put in the cover story, but the real reason has got nothing to do with it. It's like climate change. It's like terror. It's like COVID. They're just cover stories for the system of governance which is coming in, which we are disputing.
Yeah.
You know? I think we should leave it there.
Which we are actively fighting against, actually.
Yes. Yeah, because we can see the disproportionate takeover of everything which is going on, which is basically just a robbery right? It's just a robbery.
That is,
It's a
grand
burglary.
theft,
It's a global burglary, right? That's what it is. You know, it's a smash and grab, and they want to take everything. There's nothing else to it, really.
Uh-huh. Yep. At the very essence, that is exactly right.
Someone said, Mark, will you be on Trump media? I didn't know there was such a thing. But maybe I could get really framed as a domestic terrorist if I got on that, couldn't I? That'd be interesting. I could be on the run like Casey in my camper van. We are joking here, of course. He's not really on the run, of course. But yeah, I think we have to have some kind of humor about it. But thanks a lot, Vicky. And just give us your website again for the listener.
Okay. My website is thetechnocratictyranny.com. And my older website is listed on the Technocratic Tyranny, so you can get to that. And my email address is on both websites. So there you go.
Thanks a lot, Vicky. And to everybody out there who's lasted this long, I've been doing quite a lot of these over the last few days and intend to do a lot more. If you're a listener to the show and you'd like to come on, do let me know. We have a Discord group. I don't know how long we're going to have that, but there's quite a lot of people on there and some really interesting information. So if you're sick of social media and the banality of what it is, join our Discord group. And we are on Odyssey. I put all of our videos on Odyssey, all of our radio shows on Odyssey. We do not post to YouTube anymore, apart from our live streams. And look on wondersontheworld.net on the homepage and listen to our Sunday shows, 9:30 p.m. every Sunday. That's all I've got to say about that. And as Marie's just put in, night all. So good night, everybody. Thanks a lot. And I'll be back very soon. wondersontheworld.net, and keep your eye out for the live streams because there's going to be quite a lot of them until they kick us off YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody.